Ubuntu is the #1 operating system in the cloud, certainly on people like Rackspace, as far as I understand. I believe also on Amazon, and so it's the #1 operating system going. And we've got two huge titans, one already existing, Eucalyptus, and also OpenStack as well, starting to appear. Lots of interest around OpenStack as well, forming in that infrastructure layer. So my first question, is it over for proprietary systems in the infrastructure space? And while you debate that, I'll run out here and see if people have questions.
Well, I mean, as the proprietary guy sitting on the stage, let me point out that when you say, is it over for proprietary infrastructure, you're talking about software. So, okay, on
Absolutely.
the software side.
Yeah, not hardware.
Yeah, because the one thing that the open source community has to understand, right, is all of this stuff has to run on stuff that's built from elements that, you know, came from natural resources and were forged into the silicon and the metal and everything else that it takes to make that machine run. And there's a cost to all of that. There's a huge economy behind it. And so, you know, there's no such thing as free hardware. There's just, there's an element of cloud that says, hey, the guy whose stuff you put out there has to get paid, okay? So once we've said that, we kind of now have to begin to understand that also, and I'll talk about this again tomorrow a little bit, but it's kind of an interesting little thing, right? So you can deploy software if you have access to the machine to do so. There's a corollary to that. He who owns access to the machine gets to pick the software that gets deployed. So in the cloud world, one of the things that's going to come out of here is that open source infrastructure has an interesting challenge. If enough people are deploying the open source infrastructure software, there's a good sized community that has a vested interest in modifying that software and improving that software. The question the open source community hasn't answered yet is, if I'm running on a platform as a service environment which hides all of that infrastructure code for me, do I care anymore? Am I going to put any effort at all into improving that infrastructure, right? So that's one question, which means that there's an opportunity in the world of non-open source to do a couple things. One is to put an infrastructure package together that is the equivalent of a server today, right? It's the equivalent of, you know, this is a baseline that you can put your cloud operating system, for lack of a better, your cloud system on top of and make that operate. And there's also the traditional value of features, capabilities, service, and support that has always made open source and proprietary live together and innovate together over time. And I personally think that open source is going to play a major role in cloud, but it's, you know, contrary to what Marten might say, I think it's going to be a follower as it sees the service providers putting features and capabilities out on the market. Open source will follow to try to replicate that rather than innovate. You want to counter that?
I expressed my view. I think open source will be an innovator in cloud computing, and I love the challenge. You know, I'm very happy to see companies like Cisco or others do it on a closed source model, and we'll see what happens. That's what makes it fun. No, you are not.
We're not doing it.
No, but you sort of represented it in an extended way.
Yeah.
I didn't really mean Cisco. Maybe I meant somebody else.
I agree. I think open source, I agree with Marten that open source, I think, will be where a lot of the innovation comes from, but proprietary stacks will always be around, just like IIS and Windows exists, even though Apache and Linux, two really of the most successful open source initiatives, didn't kill them. I think you might not be able to charge as much for them if that's your business model or any, and you might have to build other services, or it's not going to just be the basics. You're going to have to do more.
What's the markup on an iPad?
Oh, it's probably
and how much
zero.
and what's the markup on the software that you're running on your iPad?
I think
frankly, I mean, I love that the open source community, and it's not all the open source community, I love that people get in their heads that, oh, if there's open source out there, it's going to kill all other forms of innovation. But frankly, it's what works and what the experience is that matters. And so from that perspective, you know, I would counter-argument and say, you know, if somebody put together a beautiful sort of, you know, data center, highly scalable data center environment that was the total package put together that was really cheap to operate because you didn't have to do a lot of operations work to make it work, and then put a bunch of ready-to-go services from multiple parties or from one party On top of that, that's a viable business model, even with an open source alternative on the market. The question becomes the standards debate.
In fact, I think that having open source options is going to drive innovation in that proprietary market, because they're going to have to. They're not going to be able to just sit with the basics. So I think that's kind of what I think, is they're going to have to innovate outside of what the basics are to compete with the core that's open source.
Or to do what people do with open source distros and package it together in a way that's, that's unique and different experience than other forms.
I think we shouldn't underestimate the ability of enterprises to throw an awful lot of money at proprietary software, even when there's a good open source alternative. I mean, as Martin said, we were hoping that after 10 years that proprietary software wouldn't exist anymore, and it does, and it's not always because it's better, it's just because it can be very, very sticky, and CIOs make very, very long-term decisions which take a long time to filter out of the system. I think with the cloud, though, that the open source world is innovating, and it's the lead. I think proprietary software is actually following to a certain extent now, but it still has to address this issue that its main revenue-generating model is a source of friction in the cloud. That this is the problem that ultimately it may have a structural problem it can't address, where open source can continue to prosper, and rather than sitting sort of 50-50 side by side in the data center, it actually becomes a 80-20 or 90-10 kind of split in the cloud software.
So I have a question, and so I agree with Simon, but this is like, I'm a kid in a candy store. We got like 4 leaders here in different areas of cloud, open source cloud, proprietary, Cisco. But so are we missing an opportunity here? And so there's a couple of things that I've heard of, like last night at Cloud Camp, there was this discussion about like virtualization is kind of a stopgap, multi-tenant solution for operating systems. Like, okay, I stuffed that away. I heard you talk today, Rick, about how really easy it is to create a cloud, right? It's a hypervisor abstraction. In fact, I visited a shop about 2 months ago. They built a Perl-based open VZ in 2 months, one guy. Right? And it had a lot of freaking cool features. Some features I haven't even seen in Eucalyptus and not, I mean, it was very siloed. So the question is, for me, is like, we also have heard James talk about possibly a cloud operating system and a new frontier of network operating system. So are we missing an opportunity? You got your OpenStack, what you guys are doing, to kind of redefine what a cloud operating system might look like? Or, I mean, are we stuck still in this operating system paradigm, where we're still thinking about, the box and, how do we manage the box? Should we be thinking more about a new type of operating system? I mean, this is future of the cloud, right? So future of open source. What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think that hopefully, like at least what we're trying to do is disruptive enough so that we'll stop thinking about this. IaaS, I want us to stop. I want to just let's do it, and then let's build on that. Let's create visions and stop worrying about the wheel. So I think that we're opening up we're opening up for people to create whatever and not think about the basics anymore.
Okay, we've got a question over here. Hang on a second.
Hi, my name's Bryce Fosdick with Interactive Hotel Solutions. Martin, you showed a slide about the end of the client-server era, and it's kind of interesting because at another conference I was at end of last year, they were saying we're actually going back to more of a client-server era than ever, just because of how web applications work with Ajax and all that. And do you disagree with that? And also, I mean, the way I would see it, as a typical web application, the more Ajax-type technology you use, just lost the word. Basically, the clients at this point could be your, it's really the cloud. So your end user, that could be the biggest cloud available, right?
So my point was that there was an infrastructure called client server, which was deployed starting in the 80s, and I think we are now saying farewell to that infrastructure. Sure, in the future we will need clients to access stuff, we will have servers, but they will be essentially built in a different way. And this goes back to the question here about the disruption. Of course, this is the long-term opportunity here, which we are very much engaged in creating a whole new platform that may one day become the operating system. But let's compare to what happened on the client side of client server. So a young guy named Mark Andreessen stood up and said, here's a web browser. It will render the desktop operating system useless. He said that, and at the same time, Microsoft made a $1 billion bet against him, because that was just too much. You don't say those things. But now it's finally happening. We're seeing now how on handheld devices you get to a situation where most of the stuff is driven by the browser, and we can perhaps see a future where there isn't a difference anymore between the operating system and the browser. It just all melts together. I think this can very well happen in the cloud space, but I don't think it's something we can now announce and go after. It's a massive undertaking, and it has to do with the fact that operating systems come from a single machine thinking. You build operating system for one machine, but cloud you build for a cloud. It's from the get-go, it is distributed. Right. So yes, very much so. And sure, 10 years from now, somebody can say, okay, you know, the more things change, the more they are the same. It's still client-server, but I think it will be built on different components. And business-wise, it means that everything will be replaced. There will be a need for the NoSQL movement to replace the relational database. There will be a need for a new operating system to replace the old one. There will be a need for new applications that can scale horizontally. And for anybody building a business and looking at the industry, it's just an amazing new green field of everything shifting. That's what I meant. But those things take time, 10 years, 20 years.
I'd say, you know, one of the fundamental things that I start most of my presentations with is a key observation that I gained about a year and a half ago. Cloud computing is an application-centric operations model. So to his point, what changes from client-server isn't the application architecture of components speaking to each other over a distance. What changes is this fundamental idea that server means box, as opposed to server means some capacity that can handle a component that's running in a shared multi-tenant environment for multiple user use, right? So I think that's, you know, I agree with Marten. I don't agree necessarily with the terminology outright, but I agree with Marten that the fundamental shift that's coming out here is that the unit of deployment that cloud computing drives is fundamentally different. It's not take a box and build on top of it. It's start with the application, describe what it needs, and get something to take care of that.
Okay, we have a question over here from Simon Phipps.
Thank you. So, interesting hearing the assumption being made. I've heard it quite a lot now here at pre-OSCON, that open source needs to be directly monetized. One of the observations that I make about the history of open source software is that open source happens when people bring a part of their interest to a community at their own cost and synchronize that part of their own interest with many others who come to that community to synchronize a part of their interest. Each one comes to the community bearing their own cost, and each one benefits from the synchronization of their interests with the interests of others. And it seems to me that a kind of open source where you have to withhold features in order to monetize the software is a special case. That the general case of open source is likely to be much more like the Apache Software Foundation, with many people coming together to synchronize their interests in order to reduce their costs and innovate in community. I wonder if the panel would be interested in commenting on which kind of open source they think will have the greatest impact on cloud computing. The kind that is where features are withheld by a small project, or the kind where a large community of many competitors comes together to collaborate.
Was that for whom?
All of us, I think.
Was this aimed at anybody?
I can answer it from my side.
Whoever would like to answer.
Very, very, very quickly, I can answer that. I think a collaborative community approach is going to produce the best software and is going to be successful. I mean, that's something I strongly believe in, and that's kind of the way we're building our community and our open source project.
I think it's a strength of the open source world that it can contain more models than the closed source world. So it's sort of interesting that in the open source world you have very few licenses you use, but you have lots of different ways of doing what you're doing, whether it's a business or a non-business, only a collaborative effort. Whereas in the closed source world, everybody has a different license, but the business model is just one and the same. So I see it as a strength that we can do all of this. And it doesn't really matter which one is better. The great thing is you can try out all of this. And I happen to believe that if I've always believed in open source as a way to generate financial wealth. And maybe I'm in a minority, but I've done it once, and it produced a lot of wealth for the founders of MySQL, unseen amounts. So, and I think that's the way to compete in the market, because whether we like it or not, markets function under a financial and economic model. And to compete with a company like VMware or compete with a company like Microsoft, you have to have financial strength. And if you don't, then you can still enjoy the collaborative effort of building software. And maybe you're building the best software that way. But to affect the market forces, you need financial muscle. And that's what I believe in. And it's so great that in this room here, we can have all those models. We can have as many models as we like. And I feel it's not productive to try to find the right one or the pure one, because I think we don't know, and even if we know, it doesn't lead to anything. I think we should be happy about the colorfulness of various open source approaches. Just think back at Red Hat. What was Red Hat's business model early on? Selling boxes with handbooks and CD-ROMs inside. That's how they started their business.
So yeah, I mean, I think I'd echo what Marten says there, more or less, that the market will decide essentially which are the better business models here. Certainly from a distribution point of view, we just want to make it easy for people to get access to the technology from whichever business model it's been produced in. And I think the jury's still out on what the impact of cloud is and what the cloud user community prefers. It is the case that sometimes features which are held back or that money can generate good innovation. I mean, Microsoft used to do a very good job in the GUI world because they could afford to spend a lot of money on user design, user testing, and so on. So I don't think it's a slam dunk that open source is, pure open source is always best. I think you have to have a slightly more nuanced approach, and Canonical has always had that towards proprietary software. So I think we're seeing this is an interesting year to test these models out, to see which one works best in the cloud world, which does bring new dynamics which we haven't seen in perhaps other enterprise application development.
It's not just about business models, though, Neil. I mean, at some point it's about how you produce the best software. And you have a dilemma when you take an open core approach, is that at some point someone gives you a patch that makes your open source software better than your closed bits. And then what do you do? I mean, if I've delivered a patch to you that has functionality that you later release in an enterprise version closed, I'm going to be very, very suspicious. And I think there are some serious dilemmas with the open core model. Not with the business model part of it, but just how it actually interacts with the open source community and the people that are contributing to it.
Yeah, I thought Rick's point was really good about take care of the infrastructure layer, make it utility computing, then just build on it. And I thought that's really, really good point. My question, though, is about the fact that a lot of people seem to be trying to take it to the next level, talking about the platform as a service. Now, particularly with open source, and I run an infrastructure cloud company, I know how the virtual machines cost nothing. I mean, they cost me dollars per month. And I don't think in the open source world there's necessarily any compelling reason to go beyond just the current infrastructure layer we have, with the distribution being the platform and going up to sort of the Google App Engine type level. Yes, with proprietary systems, Microsoft systems, it's very expensive to run a large number of virtual machines because of the licenses. So my question is, do you think that perhaps commoditizing the infrastructure layer around the virtualized the virtual machines is enough? Do we need to really go to another layer of abstraction with the platform?
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think we do, and we'll see that. I mean, I think that we're very focused on the infrastructure piece at the moment because this is where the activity is. And but from a user point of view, the developers, I think it speaks to John's point. Sometimes they don't want to be thinking at these kind of very low-level bricks. They want to get higher up. And I think developers, they like Google App Engine. There may be some sort of enterprise deployment issues with it, but it's certainly very popular with the kind of crowd who are driving this application-centric worldview in the cloud. And we still get to see really good, compelling open source platform as a service plays made. And But I think that will build on top of the infrastructure piece. I don't think you can separate the two out. I do think there's a natural evolution. I think Marten made this as well, that we'll focus on the infrastructure bit, and we've got a little bit of a sort of a settling of the sands. And once that happens, then I can see in the next year or two, well, then there'll be a lot more effort and development to put around creating very compelling open source platform as a service distributions.
Yeah, I think that a critical element to understand is if it's an application-centric operating model, the people who are making the decisions about how to consume infrastructure move from the sysadmins and operators at that level to the application owners and application developers, right? So if that happens, now you have to start thinking about how do you make life as easy as possible for an application developer and make them as productive as possible. That thought right there, I think John told a story this morning about this, I think it's pretty consistent with what you hear, is look, you ask an application developer what they want from their network, what do they want from their server, what do they want from their storage, they'll tell you, I don't want to really have to think about it. I just want the things to work. You start moving that into the infrastructure and the middleware layer and the reasons why middleware gets consumed for distributed applications in the way that it does, it's the same story. It's about beginning to eliminate the problems of integration, the problems of execution and deployment in the environment. So as long as developers and application owners are driving decisions, as long as IT doesn't sort of step in and say, look, we're going to make a decision about what the cloud options are on the table, and it's always, there's always rogue if you can't go through the main system. I think you're going to be driven towards more of a platform and more of a software as a service model over the longer term. Ultimately, I think the reason IBM and Google are important in cloud isn't because they are or may be going to do infrastructure as a service. The reason they're important in cloud is because I can imagine 10 years from now going to Microsoft and saying, I'm starting a business. I need full set of IT to support a new business. Financials, back-end office, hiring and HR stuff, and I know I can go and get one account from Microsoft or one account from Google and have that stuff ready to go. From a small, medium business perspective, even from an enterprise perspective, that's more powerful than telling me that I can spend however much money I need to on labor to build up a stack from the ground up. That's really, to me, the driver.
So, James, can I ask just that? If I'm going back to see my CIO, my message should be, look, the infrastructure space is going to become a commodity. It's open source, etc. Don't worry about that. I mean, we shouldn't be focusing on that. We should be using open source technology. The real excitement's going to be in the platform space. And then from a development point of view, that's where I should be wanting to concentrate on.
I didn't say it was a light switch. I said, that there's a movement. I said 10 years from now, right? So the thing about it, that's the absolutely honest truth of the situation right now is we've got this jumble of stuff that is IT. Any large IT organization, anybody who's worked with a large IT organization knows that complexity is nature in those organizations. So building from that complexity and taking that complexity, and tearing it apart and rebuilding it in a cloud model is going to take significant time. Now, I would say that the vast majority of high-tech firms that I've been working with and talking to are running their CRM on Salesforce.com at this point. I don't really know of any that are running internal applications anymore at all to do that function. That's, again, they've been around since 2000. That model's been around there to evaluate. There have been companies that have had success with it. Others have followed on to it. I think it's going to take 5 to 10 years, at least, to see what really happens with the evolution of IT. And so today, what are you going to go back to your CIO talk about? For greenfield applications, let's really explore the best way to get that into the cloud. Should we build our own stack? Should we use the stack that's out there already? Is there an application that's already out there that we can leverage? For what we have today that's traditional, okay, if there's a reason to do a cost-benefit analysis for moving it to the cloud, let's do that analysis. If it makes sense to move it in some way, let's figure out what that is and do it. But otherwise, it's about taking your time to get out there. It's about taking advantage of new opportunities to leverage it. And the same goes with the open source stuff. I wouldn't rip out an existing VMware installation for the sake of ripping out an VMware installation and putting in open source. I would do an economic analysis on what it means, what it's going to cost to make that change, and ultimately, if it makes a ton of sense to do it, then do it.
Okay, so we've got another question here. Hang on.
Okay, this is not related to cloud computing per se, but I want to build upon Simon's question and address it directly to Marten. So do you think within the same focus area, an open source company taking an open core approach can survive the onslaught of another company taking an purely open source approach?
Sorry, I couldn't really hear the question you said.
Within the same focus area, do you think an open source company taking an open core approach survive the onslaught of another company taking a purely open source approach, where like it's much more liberal and let's say the difference between Eucalyptus and OpenStack?
Well, it's, I don't claim to know the truth of the universe. I'm personally absolutely committed to and in full belief that to build a strong business, you must have an unfair advantage. And I hate closed source code, and if I figure out a way of not using it, I won't use it. But I'm a pragmatist, I'm an industrialist, I'm trying to build the best business there is. And I saw at MySQL how the value of the company grew 5 times from the moment we started having features that only paying customers got. So I'm not religious about it. I would love to do everything open source, but I owe it to the founders to build the biggest possible business for them and succeed in a very fiercely competitive market with big companies with billions in research where we don't have it. I think it's doable, but this is the great thing here, that there are other attempts that will try other models, and the future will tell. If I'm wrong, we will fail. If I'm right, we may still fail, because execution is important too. But it sort of is irrelevant of what we think, because of course I'm here because I believe in my model. Of course others are where they are because they believe in their model, and we don't know yet.
Well, I think a lot of it's going to depend on what the closed bit is. If the closed bit that is something that can easily be reproduced, then I think it's difficult. If there's something that, if you have something secret, something that yes, I can't get to,
big secret.
if you know something that no one else knows, or you have patents that you could come after me with, then potentially, then I think potentially you can do more with the open core. Or if you have hardware that can only work with you. I mean, I think there are ways for the open core model to resist the onslaught, but you have to have something secret. You have to have something.
So I invite everybody here to develop and fork our product and develop all the features that we have in the Enterprise Edition. Please go ahead and do it and outcompete us. And it will be a very healthy mechanism. When you go out and you do something that we did and you do it better, okay, bad on us. And you're free to do it because the Eucalyptus product is GPL. You can modify it, redistribute it, do whatever you like as long as you follow the rules of GPL3. And you should. That's what we have chosen. We have chosen a model where you can do it, and we love it when you do it. And sometimes we may feel ashamed if you do a better job than we do, but maybe we'll then offer you a job. A job in a company with growing revenues and big business opportunities. That's my value proposition.
Competition is good.
And if OpenStack is a great product, we will use OpenStack. It's Apache 2 licensed. We can include it in our offering, and we will happily do so. We will happily contribute to it. This is the power of open source. It's not the conundrum of open source.
And we would welcome it. I love those Eucalyptus guys.
I'll contribute a bug report the moment you release your software.
We've already got bugs, by the way.
Okay, we have Dave Nielsen.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Dave Nielsen, and as a pragmatic, looking at open source, it's undeniable. There's value in having community looking at and improving upon the code. But also as a pragmatic looking at cloud, there's also an undeniable benefit of just focusing on your feature, providing it as a service, and not burdening yourself with the overhead of managing a community. And I see these two as a challenge that can live together, but when you're an innovator focused on providing a service, sometimes the open source part comes very, very secondary. And I'd like to hear your comments on how possibly as a service and open source can work together.
I'm going to throw out my thing too and then let the others answer. But to your point, One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is, look, as if with the infrastructure that drives cloud, as service providers adopt, let's say 3 or 4 service providers adopt an open source cloud platform, now they have to compete against each other. The argument is that they'll compete on service. My argument would be they're also going to look for ways that they can meet new market opportunities that weren't there, be there with features or whatever it is. So the question is, do they contribute those features back to a community pool that includes their competitors? Or are they going to fork the effort or hold to themselves technologies they see as differentiating? I would hope that it would be, at very least, the last of that, hopefully contribute it back, at least hold on to it until it's not a differentiator anymore and then contribute it or something along those lines. But I don't know. And forks have happened for weird reasons in the open source world. Competition is not that weird a reason to do it, right?
Ubuntu's got a community of about 10,000 users. And to speak to your point about, this is a cost to run a community. I mean, it takes a lot of effort, and there is a balance here between the herding cats thing and the cost you put into that. And sometimes that can give you good stability, and you get all the many eyeballs on the bugs and so on. But there is a tension between that, and yes, if you just want to be gunning ahead and doing innovation and not being weighed down, perhaps we're having to manage multiple translations of everything that you do and so on. And there is a balance to be struck here. I mean, Ubuntu, it's a continual process to try and find out how to set that bar between stuff that you want to drive as an innovator and the harnessing of that huge community. And it can feel a bit of a bucking bronco sometimes. I think when you're assessing a business model, I mean, cloud is such a fast-moving space at the moment. This is one of the big gambles here about how much effort do you need to put in that, as opposed to just getting your core product ready and stable and kind of ready for the enterprise. And I mean, there's no hard answer to this. I mean, this I think is very contextual based on what it is you're doing, where you're sitting in a stack, and so on. I think it's different for whether you're developing software as a service or whether you're developing infrastructure as a service.
I've got an answer for it.
You're about to find out all the pain of running a huge, large project.
No, we have a large, and I got to feel some of that with Ubuntu.
This is true.
I'm still smarting from the pain. So you can write a really cool Apache module without being part of the Apache project. And the cool bit is you didn't have to write Apache. So I think that actually doing it in a modular way and being open like that and being part of having a community, you have the option of taking that and not participating in the community and not having to deal with it at all and making something really cool and innovative.
And then hopefully eventually contributing it.
If you want to. I mean, the risk is if you innovate for some sort of market reason, to get some sort of new business opportunity, and then you don't give it back, you run the risk of someone else in the open source doing it, everyone else adopting it, and then you being incompatible with the first version of this, and then everyone else having something that interoperates.
I'd just like to finish my comment by saying that tension is awesome. I love that tension. That's where I think the real excitement exists.
Okay, do we have any more questions for our panelists? No?
I'm just going to ask my same question again. And that's it. I hear this dynamic tension today between everything's commoditized and we all agree on what it should be. And yet I see venture capitalists funding companies to go off and pursue different approaches to it. Publicly traded companies like Rackspace funding large groups of people to go off and write it. And we have maybe 6 cloud vendors that I can think of, maybe all open source. That looks like the beginning of a market that hasn't found that breakthrough utility yet. So again, I'm just asking for more color on that same dynamic.
There needs to be consolidation. At some point, we all need to consolidate probably around. I think we need ubiquity, and what that's going to be. I mean, I think obviously Marten hopes it would be Eucalyptus, and I hope it would be OpenStack. But I think in the end, we need to consolidate around something.
I don't think it has to be consolidated.
Yeah. No, let me push on that. Why do you hope it'll be OpenStack?
Why do I think it will be OpenStack?
No, you said hope. Why do you hope it'll be OpenStack?
I hope it'll be OpenStack because of the way we're running the project, because we're allowing people to be part of the vision, and because we're trying to do it in a way that that is inclusive, you know, that is completely open. And so that's something I really believe in. So that's what I hope it will be. So and obviously I'm a part of it, and I also kind of have the same belief that Marten does about eventually making money in some way. I just don't know how as well as him.
It's a future statement. You can't do more than hope. So is it going to be a battle just between OpenStack and Eucalyptus and everybody else? It's you are the two giants?
I don't know.
I would compare this to the relational database market when it emerged. And you had IBM developing the concept, a little bit like Amazon now has developed the concept. And then you had many vendors coming. You had Oracle, you had Sybase, you had Informix, you had Ingress, and you had more. So think back how many database companies that were promising back then. They all looked good. Many of them reached 100 million in revenues. And it took a long, long time to then sort out 3 winners who remained winners for the next 20 years until the LAMP stack came. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar behavior here. So, you know, we are eager now to make announcements and promises, and everything is big, and we already talk about consolidation, but let's remember, it's very, very early. This is nascent, and anything can happen here.
On that note, I'd like to thank our panelists for a very, very interesting discussion. So please put your hands together and thank Marten, Rick, James, and Neil.